Thank you. Thank you, too. Subject this morning is working with others, which I conceive to be the most important subject, perhaps, in Alcoholics Anonymous from my perspective. It's an interesting thing. I was looking at the program. There's 7 o'clock meeting this morning. Harvey, 8 o'clock meeting. I don't know who led the 6 o'clock meeting. I never even look at things that early. But the 7 and 8 o'clock meetings were both led by people who are very active in working with others. It's either one of them could have handled this topic quite well. In fact, I was thinking this morning about asking Johnny, because he talked about he does work with a lot of people. They're successful. They're active in AA. I was going to ask him to participate on this subject, but he didn't ask me to talk about humility, so screw him. And many of you may not know this, but I believe I have a great deal of humility. The reason I know that to be true, I've never used much of it up. But But I think of one day when I was not humble. I remember one day when I was very proud at this very spot. Just exactly 30 years ago. I stood at this podium, Sunday afternoon. They had a Sunday afternoon meeting, the Southern California Convention. I was the closing speaker 30 years ago, 1965, at this convention. And it was a little different. The same auditorium, a little smaller. It's been redesigned since then. It seems to me that the aisles have been made steeper since then. I used to be able to go up in a skip and a bound. Now I need 2 helpers. But it was a meeting very similar to the ones we've been having. Except one thing. It was my 7th AA birthday that day. And that very day, the leader was a guy I sponsored. The woman who read Chapter 5, Jenny G., was a woman I sponsored. The guy who read the traditions was a man I sponsored. And then I got up and I just glowed because I was doing quite well. 7 years before that, I'd been on Skid Row. I had my front teeth kicked out. I was dying on the street, and now I was an executive in television in Hollywood. I wore shiny suits, and I was doing just wonderfully well. Halfway through the meeting, as I was talking, sharing, there was a little bigger crowd than this, and I was over here, a guy named Chuck Chamberlain, and he was looking at me, I could see, with admiration. Different people. Right in the middle of the meeting, an old woman who was an old harridan of that time called Polly Hall. Wonderful woman, but she was a very strong-willed woman. If she liked you, she really liked you. It took me years to get her to like me. But she had an eye going out this way and an eye going out this way. You know, you'd bump into her all the time, and she'd say, "Why don't you go where you're looking?" I said, "Why don't you go where you're looking? You're looking in 2 different directions, you know." But right in the middle of my talk, she brought down a birthday cake down the aisle, and they all sang "Happy Birthday." I never knew that to happen in this convention, the Southern California Convention. And my wife was sitting there, and a old guy named Tommy O'Mara, who is now dead, and the guy I was sponsoring. And after the meeting, people came up, and those lepers touched the hem of my jacket for it. And I was driving home across the grapevine, and we were talking about a great success that talk had been. They were too shy to talk about it much, but I talked about it. And I suddenly thought to myself, things have never been this well in my life, and especially after such a terrible low. I thought, if I had a great tragedy or something bad really happened, who would I call? Now, my sponsor had died a couple of years before that. He had gone back to drinking and died drunk. But I didn't really need a sponsor so much because he'd give me a good background, I felt. So I didn't have a sponsor to call, and I thought, who would I call? And I went through a list of people I knew, and they all had flaws or faults or didn't have the same approach to AA that I had. They weren't terribly active. I worked right up, and I got to Bill Wilson. And Bill Wilson was not up to my standards because he was taking niacin. But old timers remember that, newcomers don't. But that was a big thing. You got to do vitamin B therapy, which didn't hurt you, but we purists didn't believe you should take anything. And I thought to myself, if I had a tragedy, there'd be nobody in the world for me to call. And it suddenly struck me, I may be closer to being drunk now than I have been since the day I got sober. I've now done what I've accused many people of doing. I'm floating right out the top of AA, which is just as bad as dropping out of the bottom. So I got to get a sponsor. Now, who'll I get? I don't want these smarmy types who, life is a miracle, and every time the sun comes up, it's another miracle in your life. You know. I wanted my sponsor, my original sponsor, inculcated one of the great things he inculcated me is do, act. So I want to find someone who was ahead of me who was really active. There were some people ahead of me, but they were often different tangents. And I thought of this, my mind finally, I thought, who's the most active person I know in AA? And I was thinking, well, it's Chuck Chamberlain. But I wouldn't want him to be my sponsor because he's just a bit much, you know. When he comes into meetings, an old lady say, "Oh, it's our beloved Chuck." You know, who cares? In fact, when I was new, I used to get so angry at him at Easter morning meetings at the 6300 Club. When he got up to speak, I left just to punish him. I don't know if the meeting was called off after that or not. But I thought, well, I'll ask him to be my sponsor. I'll give him some lift in his old age. I'll give him something to... So I called him up, and I said, this is Clancy. I'd like to come down and see you tomorrow at your office. He said, fine, come on down. 11 o'clock. So in the morning, it looked a little different Monday morning. I thought, you know, what am I? I'd left my office in Hollywood where I was making decisions for all mankind. Roll it. And I was going down to Alameda to talk to some well-meaning but rather a little too spiritual for my taste. So in there, he said, sit down, Clancy. I said, thanks. He said, what can I do for you? And I thought, well, I don't want to disappoint the guy. I'll give him something to live for. Frankly, Chuck, I came down here to ask you to be my sponsor. And he looked at me with a smile. He said, Clancy, how surprising. I heard you speak at Bakersfield yesterday. I thought you'd come down to offer to be mine. I realized right then I'd made a terrible mistake. But I was glad to see that he wasn't as smarmy as I thought he was. And he said he didn't really have babies. If I wanted to call him my sponsor, I could, but he didn't want to call me his baby. So I called him every day. I told him what I was doing, and he pretty cool at a distance. And I guess it was not very long after that. I guess it was the next, I forget what it was. But he called me up one day. He said, Clancy, he's calling me. He said, you consider me to be your sponsor, do you? I said, yes, I do, Chuck. He says, well, get me some tickets for the World Series. I said, you bet, Chuck. I guess this was 1966, because I had a guy who was doing very well, kind of wealthy by that time, at least successful in his field, a guy named Byron. So I called him Byron, and I said, Byron, are you doing better? He said, yes, I am. I said, you consider me to be your sponsor? He said, yes, I do. I said, I want some World Series tickets, and I want them fast. That's what sponsorship is. You transmit what you have found. And he brought the tickets. I brought them down to Chuck, and Chuck said, thank you very much. And it's okay, Chuck. Whenever you need anything, let me know. As long as Byron's alive, we'll get it. And so he became my sponsor, and My project for the next 5 or 10 years was to get him to approve of me. And that was a difficult thing. He did not approve of me. He really did, because he thought whatever I was doing there was not AA. West LA said, I don't know what you people are doing there, but it isn't AA. AA is sharing. It isn't commanding. It's sharing. Well, it isn't the way it looks, Chuck, you see. I had him come up and speak at my birthday in 1966, first time, and he came in, and he was a little cold. We had a big meeting there. There's people I sponsored there, and a lot of excitement in the room. And he got up and he spoke. And Clint, you remember this? Some of you remember this? Keith, no, I don't keep this. But he said, I'm not really your speaker here tonight. I'm just to fill in between chapter 5 and the main event, which is Clancy's cake. But I'll try to take up a few minutes if it isn't too much bother. I thought, oh, Jesus, he misunderstands. When I got my cake that night, I actually had tears in my eyes. I said, it isn't the way it looks. There's nothing special. It's just that we're together. I said, everybody has a cake here. And after the meeting, everybody that has a cake here comes to my house. We have a very large group. That after every Tuesday night meeting, we all went to my house and had coffee and cake. And everybody who attended was welcome. And I said, this night will be the same thing. All of you are welcome. I'm not selecting a special few. And Chuck, I hope you'll come. It's just another birthday in our group. So after the meeting, we drove over to my house. And unfortunately, the little group of people, Clinton, Bill Brogan, and some others, I guess, in order to be cute, had in my driveway earlier that evening, without me knowing it, I came around the corner. I couldn't park in front of my house, too many cars. I parked around the corner. I came around the corner, and the neighbors were out, and there's all sorts of things going on. What the hell's wrong? Does I have a fire? And in my driveway was a big Hollywood Klieg light going back and forth like this. And I couldn't believe it. And I walked out. I was watching. I bumped right into Chuck, and he was standing there. He says, "Just another birthday, hey?" You see, it's not the way it looks. But I worked with that old man, and he finally, after some years, he began to sound happy, what I called him, or at least tolerable, and he became my sponsor, and he finally even acknowledged I was his baby in his book, and cheered me up. But the great fact he did for me, one of the great things he did, was I had to do things to win his approval. I had to do things that would be so easy to get away from, of being active, of getting involved, of doing the things, of saying yes, of not ever saying. The example I gave at his memorial service, I don't know a better way to put it. One night I came home from work, and I was 10 years sober by this time. My wife and children were living in West LA. It was a hot summer's day, just dreadful. And Friday night, and the freeways were jammed. I got home and I was so tired. And I looked at my calendar. I was supposed to go to Oildale. That's a suburb of Bakersfield, if you could imagine that. And there were about 10 guys in their group. You're just like talking to a painting, just. I'm sure it's all different now. But I was so tired. And I called up Chuck. And I said, Chuck, this is Clancy. Don't misunderstand me. I'm active. I do everything I'm supposed to do. I've been secretary. I sponsor people. And tonight, I'm so tired. My kids would like to go to the show. I haven't been at home for a night this week. And that freeway going, not even the freeway. There was much of a freeway going north at that time. I don't think there was there was no 5 going up. There was just a road. And I said, would it be okay if I, called them up and told them to get somebody else? Because they only got 15 people. Of course, they can get somebody from the club up there. And that is going to make a difference to them. It's just something to kill an hour, before they go back to the country western. What do you think? Would it be okay with you if I didn't go? He said, Clancy, I really don't have time to talk right now. I'm awfully sorry. I'm on my way to go to Lake Arrowhead, which was further than Oildale, and talk to those 6 people up there, because I know they're expecting me. So I got to leave right now, but why don't you call me tomorrow? We'll talk about it. I made a noise like a dial tone for him. But that was the concept of action. I don't know a better way to explain what working with others is about. It is not a surprise that working with others is mentioned in our book as the most important single action that you can take. Not necessarily sponsoring people. We keep thinking, I can't find anybody to sponsor. It doesn't say sponsoring. It says working with others, getting out of self. And there are two excellent reasons, I think, for that. One, obviously, and most apparently, for people to have a sponsor. When you're new, I can't conceive how difficult it must be not to have a sponsor. You can have a sponsor, but you know, there are types. They're talking about types of alcoholics. And Bill Wilson talks about our type of alcoholic, which is a combination of mind and body. But I think within that there are also types of alcoholics, not really defined, but intense people and gentle people and laid-back people. People like me, intense people, need intense help. I cannot get by on, I would say this honestly, that the sponsor that saved my life, if Chuck Chamberlain had been my sponsor in 1958 when I got sober, I would have died drunk. Because he was not a hands-on, do this, do that. He would share, and when he'd been sober a while, it was a great inspiration. But, you know, he was talking about a painting, and when you're new, you're looking to identify colors. There's no painting. Blue? Blue? Well, look at the Merle. Merle? I don't even know Merle, you know. I had a great deal of difficulty for that reason over the years in slipping again and again in city after city and state after state. And this time when I got sober, I'd lost everything, and I got a sponsor. I got a sponsor only because I'd seen him in the movies playing loving, kindly roles, and I thought he'd be a loving, kindly sponsor like the other sponsors I had, and he should have won the Academy Award for every one of those roles because he was a nasty, cruel dictator, and he would insist. I used to try to explain to him, I didn't have any front teeth, so it was a little difficult, but you know, Bob, I was living in the back seat of an abandoned car back at the AA club, but I was making my move. I wore the same green corduroy jacket night and day. When I finally took it off, I had to show ID to get in the club. I said, you know, Bob, I know you mean well in asking me to do these things, but unlike many of the people around here, I've been around AA many years, and I've been in and out of AA for many years. It's true, but I understand AA, and I've been in psychoanalysis at depth for a long time. And I understand the motives for what you're trying to do here, and I really understand that this sort of thing may be very good for people of limited intellectual resources, but there must be something a little deeper we can get into. And he explained it to me. He said, "What?" He said, "For Christ's sake!" I said, "Dear Bob, in my judgment, I know you mean well, but in my judgment, this isn't for me." He said, "In your judgment? Who cares about your judgment? You live in the back seat of an abandoned car, for Christ's sake. If I wanted your judgment, I'd put my head in the back window and ask you for it." And he made me very upset a lot of times. I've said this many times, but many times in my first year, I've thought about getting the money together to call the World Service Office in New York and I just want you to know, there's an old timer in Los Angeles killing newcomers. And I'll give you his name and address. I couldn't get the money together at the right time when I felt like it. Now it's all different. Now it's almost 37 years later. When I talk to the World Service Office in New York, I say, "No, I'm not." I've been on both sides of this equation. I want someone else now to lie awake and think about me for a while. That's only fair. But I was inculcated this time into taking the actions of Alcoholics Anonymous. Some of the greatest spiritual lessons I've learned in Alcoholics Anonymous in my life, I learned in those early months and years in desperation. And I think that's the great value of sponsorship, of allowing someone to superimpose emotions that are not lost in a shuffle over your perceptions that are sometimes just up and down and crazy and all over it. The great thing about sponsorship is that there's a leveling effect. The great lessons I learned here. I learned some great spiritual. I was raised in the church. I can quote the Bible. I can sing hymns as well as anyone in this room, I'm sure. And I can play them on the piano and sing them and tap dance to them for that matter. But I know about God, and I also knew that God knew about me, which gave me a lot of night sweats. But so spiritual. What are the spiritual lessons you learn? Hey, you learn prayer. You learn meditation, you learn God. I already knew those things. The spiritual lessons I had to learn in AA, I didn't realize they were spiritual lessons. I thought they were just cruelties on my sponsor's behalf. But I've come to believe that they're the great spiritual lessons that have changed my life. Do what you said you would do. Be where you said you would be. When you said you would be there. Or let them know you're not going to be there. If you have a commitment, execute it unless you die. Execute that commitment. Take care of what you're supposed to. Take care of your responsibilities. Watch out for your children. On and on, things like that. And these are the lessons that little by little were inculcated into me, superimposed over my intellect and knowledge. Because it turns out that actions are what change it here, not understanding, because that comes and goes. I suppose the best example of that I know, I've used this example many times, but alcoholism is truly a disease of perception. The reason alcohol is so important to me, it takes a gray, dull life and transforms it, at least temporarily, into a technicolor, bright life. It changes things. When I'm sober, it's bad. When I drink, it's better. That's why I drink. And when I get sober, as was mentioned earlier today, when I get sober, it just becomes, after a while, intolerable. And I can't imagine what AA is going to do for me. And it seems to me that's what sponsors' greatest gifts are. It's not a surprise. People who travel, Johnny, a lot of people in this room, Clint, a lot of people who travel around the country speaking, you see all kinds of AA. And as has been said many times, you find pockets of enthusiasm. You find an enthusiastic area like Bellevue, Nebraska. And then you find 200 miles of blah meetings where they sit around and say, I put the plug in the jug. I've never been so happy. Could we shut the meeting? More than a coincidence. I've come to believe that's the reason for it. And the reason for it is because where there's a strong sponsorship ethic, people get led to take actions they would never do left to their own judgment. And they get involved, and they do things, and they become part of things. The example I always think about, we always think we're seeking truth here. Everybody's looking for truth. And there is no truth, because truth is only as I see it. My truth is as I see it. It isn't as you see it. That wall back there is kind of no, that's not even any known color. That book, that's a pea color is what it is. That book over there, the background is blue. It's a big blue. And now, I know that's blue, that's truth. If all of you told me that was red, that would not change my opinion that much. It tells me you're crazy, you don't know what you're talking about, you don't understand colors. That's blue. And when you're kind of new, or when you go through bad times, sponsors tell you things that seem as stupid. They don't actually say this, but it sounds like they're saying this. That book is red. No. That book is blue. I tell you that book is red. That book is blue. Well, God damn it, you act like it's red. Now, they don't tell you about the color of books. They tell you things equally stupid. Go over and apologize to that woman. You called her a bitch. She is a bitch. Why do you think she's a bitch? She told her newcomer not to go to bed with me. Well, she was absolutely right. You don't apologize. Sorry. You bitch. I don't care how it looks to you. You go to that job in the morning. Jesus, Bob. I've been a big executive. I've had my picture in the New York Times for my abilities. They got me wrapping advertising mats in the back of a 2-bit advertising agency. They're using me, Bob. They're screwing me around. Nobody cares. It's the only job you can get. Go to work. I don't care how it looks to you. Go to that Tuesday night meeting, Central Hollywood. Jesus, Bob. They're all weirdos down there. Half of the men dress like women, half the women dress like men. Bela Lugosi goes there sometimes. You bite your goddamn neck if you don't watch him. It's a terrible meeting. He says, go to that meeting. You fit right in. And this goes on and on and on. Humiliation follows humiliation, indignity, sense of intellectual sellout every day. And one day you look around and the damn book has turned red. Then you have to spend the rest of your life dealing with dummies who think it's blue. But that's what sponsorship does in the actions and involvements. It has you do things. And on the other side of it, of course, the simple reason for sponsorship is quite simple. It gets me out of self. Two great things. You don't ever really understand a topic. It's a maximum of education. You never really understand a subject till you begin to teach it, because you must take subject matter that you can not answer on a question, but you now must interpret that through your own experience. I have learned more about AA by trying to teach people than I ever have by nodding while good people taught me. You can get information, but by the time you have to share your experience, it becomes something else. That is the great reason you learn about the program by working with others. And secondly, you get the greatest gift there is in all of Alcoholics Anonymous. You have a reason to temporarily get your mind off yourself, because that's the name of this game. When I'm thinking about that sick puke, I'm not thinking about this sick puke. It's just like a letter from home with a check in it. I'll tell you, that is something. And that's why you stay active. And that's why you must also at the same time, there's a funny little line there you discover after a while. You can't get into the sickness with them. That's a hard thing, because you think you should. You can't get into the sickness with them. You got to back off a little bit. You can never be cheek and jowl. You never can be really close. You must keep a little part of you separate. So when the trouble comes, you can see them as an alcoholic, not as your pal. That is why family members can rarely help other family members, because they see them as family members first. That's why lovers can rarely help one another. That's why couples can rarely help one another. Because there has to be a little party that when the time comes, you must keep them at a distance and say, just like a doctor. A doctor has to be able to tell you, you have cancer in your breast, I must cut it off. You can't have a doctor who says, I like him so well, I don't want to give him the bad news. And they die from it. So I think the greatest, working with others, that's why it says in our book, when all else fails, work with another alcoholic. Not sit and meditate. Don't sit and think about things. Don't evaluate. Don't wonder what the meaning of the universe is. When all else fails, you work with another alcoholic. And that's where it comes from. Doesn't mean you have to sponsor them. There are some great Alcoholics Anonymous members who have never had the opportunity to sponsor anybody, because you have to be asked. But you can be of service. And I'll tell you, if you go to meetings regularly and you're kind to newcomers, they'll ask you to be their sponsor. Now, some of them will ask you after a while, but not maybe when you want to. This morning, I've asked a couple of people who I think have done an excellent job with working with others, as far as I can see. One is a member of Johnny's group, and she's almost, although she doesn't accept it that way, to many of us, she's become a very, very successful woman sponsor. You can always tell her babies, because they all sound exactly like her when they talk. You don't even have to wonder. That must be the first law. We're going to sit down and discuss your speaking, and then we'll talk about the steps. But by God, they all stay sober. And by God, they're doing well. And I'm going to ask Gloria to come up and give me a little bit of experience. Thank you.
I'm Gloria. I'm an alcoholic. Thank you, Clancy, for asking me to share. I'm a person that can't stay sober, and I don't know how to live, and I sit on bus benches on Anaheim and California Street in downtown Long Beach in dirty clothes and wonder where I've been and where I was going, and I drink wine in alleys. I just don't know how to live without the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I was given this gift of sobriety. I was given the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. And because of that, I'm alive today and I'm sober today. And I'm able to be a useful member of Alcoholics Anonymous. The book tells me that that feeling of uselessness and self-pity will disappear. And that's happened for me. I spent my life feeling sorry for myself. Thinking about myself all the time. All I thought about was myself and how bad I had it and all those things. And I was useless. I had no use in life. I wasn't able to take care of anything. I wasn't able to take care of myself. I wasn't able to be a useful wife, a useful mother. I could do nothing in life until the program of Alcoholics Anonymous showed me how to live and gave me some principles to live by. And today I feel useful. Somebody who's gone now used to say that he makes amends to the universe because he couldn't make amends in all the places that he needed to. And I feel that way. I just am grateful for the opportunity that Alcoholics Anonymous gives me to be able to make amends, to give back to the world where I took from the world. I feel useful today, and it's very important to me. I feel like John did when he got up here earlier, just in tears and so emotional in Johnny's meeting. What a very, very special feeling we had here in that meeting, and we also are having here now. It's a very, very, very precious time for me to be at this convention and to sit here and feel the feelings and look at the people. And I hear some people get up here and they mention people that are no longer with us. They're dead now. And I'm very glad that I could have known those people and that I watched them and that I paid attention to what they were talking about. I don't know. When I got here, I just was given that gift to be able to that I was given that hunger to I want to hear what you have to say, those of you who go before me, and those of you who are newer than me. I want to listen to what you have to say and try to learn how to live. You've kept me alive by sharing your experience, strength, and hope with me. And this is a very precious minute right now. This is a very precious meeting, very precious time in all of our sobriety. And I'm glad that I could be here and that I could share in it. Thank you, Clancy.
Thank you, Gloria. That's a good understanding of a personality whose life has been saved here, I think, by helping others. I was thinking this morning also that our Friday night speaker, some of you were here, who speaks rapidly and intensely, known to some of us as the human hummingbird. But I'll tell you what her greatest attribute is. She sponsors women all over the country. And they all are loyal to her. They admire her, and they're kind to me only because I'm her sponsor, you know. I'm Clancy. Oh, do you know my sponsor? Yeah. And the people we heard over this convention, the people we've heard talk have been sponsors. This morning in Johnny's meeting, the people who are calling on are all sponsoring people. It isn't that you have to be. It's just that's what enables you to stay here. It enables you to become part of things. It gives you almost a sense of belonging. Now, I said my first sponsor didn't survive, and because he. Well, of course, I look back now, and he taught me a great lesson. He got angry at his home group. He had formed the Pacific Palisades meeting in the 1960s, I guess, or 1940s, I should say, and early 1950s. And he ran this meeting, and eventually they changed the format, and he didn't like that, and he was very cross. So he stopped going to that meeting. And he stopped going to a couple other meetings because the same people that changed it were going to those meetings too. And I used to try to call him up and say, Bob, didn't see you at the meeting. I'm going to go to the meetings. And he said, look, I'm doing fine. I appreciate your solicitude and caring, but you take care of yourself, kid. I've been sober a lot of years. You got 2.5 years now, 3 years. Why don't you just take care of yourself? And so I said, okay. And eventually he got a little more sour. And he decided he wanted to help people, but not the way AA does anymore, because they're too erratic here. So he went down and worked in Synanon. And down there, he apparently got feeling he wasn't really a narcotic addict like they were. And so he got upset and a little psychiatric and went to a psychiatrist and finally got some tranquilizers or pills and took those and finally drank and died drunk. And people would say to me, Jesus, Clancy, you are not terribly stable as it is. Now your sponsor dying drunk, is this going to put you over the edge? Is this going to make you lose your confidence in AA? I remember telling him, no. It proves that exactly what my sponsor said was true. If you don't do these things long enough, you get drunk and die. And I thought he was just exaggerating when he told me that, but when he proved it with his life, I could believe it. And I believe that today. I mean, there are some people apparently around AA who, was said, like Karen mentioned in her Friday night talk, typhoid Marys who carry the disease but somehow stay sober themselves. I don't know if you know who Typhoid Mary was. She was a cook in the East, and she didn't know she had typhoid, but everywhere she worked, people were dying. And they tried to trace it back to her finding. She said, can't be me. She was an Irish girl, Mary Kelly. I'm not sick. And they said, no, you're not. If you had typhoid, you'd be dying. But it turned out she had a body, one of the rare bodies in history, that could absorb typhoid fever. But she gave it to everybody else around her. And as a cook, she had a chance to help a lot of people. So she had to be isolated. And you find the same thing in AA. There are people in meetings who sit around who somehow stay sober, at least for a while. And they tell newcomers, you don't have to be a fanatic. You don't have to do all that crap. Just put the plug in the jug, go to a meeting once in a while, you'll be all right. If you need something, And they literally kill people. At least people of my type. They kill people. They stay sober, and they go from place to place, sour, bitter, but they stay sober. I remember when I was about 5 years sober, I was working with a guy, and I was trying to get him to take a fourth step, and he didn't want to take it. I said, you got to take it. We went to the Brentwood meeting one night. There was an old-timer there, been sober 18 years, 19 years. He says, they tell you have to take a fourth step. Well, I say you don't. I never took a fourth step, and I've been sober 19 years. People tell you have to take a fourth step. They're full of crap. And on the way home, my baby said to me, well, he's been sober 19 years, and he says you don't have to take an inventory. You say, I have to take an inventory. You've been sober 5 years. Who should I believe? And I had no answer for that. I'll call you in the morning. I couldn't think of an answer. Unfortunately, my sponsor was dead, and there was no one big enough for me to ask. But I thought of the answer in the middle of the night. It came to me quite clearly. I called him up next morning. I said, I got an answer to your question. Yeah, what's that? I said, is that the way you want to feel after 19 years? I felt that way when I came here, for Christ's sake. I want to feel like the people who are 19 years who have taken an inventory and are gentle and doing well and tell you with their eyes AA works. There are some people who can stay sober, become old, vicious grouches. I don't need any help I don't need a program to be like that. I can do that on my own. What I need a program for is to feel as though this is meaning something. And that's why sometimes sponsors have to superimpose actions over their babies' perceptions. Because if I didn't need the superimposition, I wouldn't be here needing help. A fellow in our group I've asked to speak this morning who's lived around Southern California, different places. And again, he's another man who is, like many people in this room, I could call on a number of them, but who has always worked with people, who is wherever he's gone. I know he's been there because he's people saying, yes, that's my sponsor. And he continues to sponsorship, and been almost 30 years sober now. And he's still working with those newcomers, which is the highest gift you can give anyone. Clint?
My name is Clint Hodges, and I'm an alcoholic. Thank you. I was sitting there thinking about I was looking at this make life a masterpiece. It sounds nice, and it is. I mean, it's like it suggests that it's up to me to make my life a masterpiece. That's the goal of all of this. But it also suggests a master, a higher power, an acknowledgement that I'm not big enough for this life, that I came here broken. And there is a book called Alcoholics Anonymous that addresses this issue in such interesting detail. And I love that book, and I love the fact that there seems to be a gold mine in every sentence. And I remember puzzling over goofy sentences like, the goose hung high. What the hell do you do with the goose hung high? I don't know what that... It's in Bill's story, and it's this little phrase with a goose hung high. I don't know what the hell that means. I don't know what it means in chapter 3 when it says Jim failed to enlarge his spiritual life and he got drunk. Except later on it says if we don't enlarge our spiritual life by working with others, we're in tough shape. And so this whole business is, oddly enough, it isn't... The steps... have an impact on my mind. And this kind of unity here has an impact on my body. It gets my body where the rest of the bodies are. But if I want to enlarge my spiritual life, I work with other people. It seems odd, isn't it? Because it is absolutely against the idea of sitting and working on my spiritual. I guess I'll enlarge. I'll go take another seminar. I'll go to church. I'll do something. And working with others is the way we have to enlarge our spiritual lives. And I've noticed over the years that my connection with the universe, that my sense of being here as a participant in Alcoholics Anonymous is almost directly proportional, and I'm almost always aware of it with the extent to which I have been working with others. There is a goofy sentence in that book that bothered me for years. It said, our very lives as ex-problem drinkers depends upon our constant thought of others and how we may help meet their needs. Jesus, that constant thought of others, our very lives. And today I know that when Wilson used that word, he used it in its fullest sense. My spiritual life, my emotional life, my intellectual life, my physical life is at risk when I'm drunk or close to getting drunk. But constant, what an interesting word that is. Constant thought of others. I know that some people have that, better people than me. But it gets to be, somebody said, well, that is a lot. I guess it intrudes with everything. But how often do you consider the force of gravity? And I guess I consider it a lot in everything I do, whether I'm just sitting down at a chair or coming up here or stepping up on that thing or standing here. I'm aware that gravity is a force in my life. And I'm also at some level aware that my constant thought of others is an important thing in my life. It's very important. I don't know that I'll ever make my life a masterpiece, but I know that today there is a way that it can become much better than it ever was. And it becomes that way when I forget about it. When I forget about it. When this program fits me in a particular way. When this program is something that I can wear. An interesting guy named Thomas Merton said, when the shoe fits, we forget about the foot. When this program is, and I'm reaching out for others, and there's a thought, I forget about myself, and I think I'm closer at that moment to having God make my life a masterpiece than at any other time. I'm glad to be here. Thank you. Thank you for coming.
Thank you. It would appear, generally speaking, that once in a while you hear people in AA and in meetings, the usual antis, the negatives. They're negative people in meetings. You don't have to worry about so much. People get so concerned about them because they're not going to be here very long. They're going to be gone after a while. It's just like the people who want to change AA. Someone asked me yesterday about this movement in the East now, where alcoholics can drink again, have a few drinks. I said, just hang on, Sloopy. If they want to drink, I don't know why they have to call a press conference if they can drink. I drank, and then I made the press myself, but not for... But sometimes in meetings they say things like, doesn't say anything in the book about being a sponsor. Bill Wilson didn't talk about being sponsored, but of course he did. My first convention I went to was the 1960 International Convention in Long Beach, and Bill Wilson introduced his sponsor to get up and talk. He said, I'd like to introduce my sponsor, Ebby. And that was the only time Ebby was sober long enough to talk at the convention, because he never stayed sober, because he could never do the things that Bill did. He could never surrender his ego enough to, but he always took refuge. I'm Bill Wilson's sponsor, and he insisted on getting credit for it. If he didn't get enough credit for it, he got drunk. It's a strange thing, which is another form of working with others that has absolutely no purpose whatsoever. The purpose of working with others is to, I suppose in the final analysis, has been said by many people better than I, to get out of self, to lose that terrible sense of self-obsession. It comes back again and again, but at least while you're doing that, it doesn't. When you're explaining, when you're teaching, as I've said before, many times I've been trying to explain something to somebody, and I think to myself, my God, that's what that means. You just learn it as you talk about it. And little by little, you take it as a rule of thumb. After a while, when you've been sober a while, people you're working with get to be a drag. It's, sometimes, Jesus, well, that phone never stopped ringing, for God's sake, what a bunch of goofs, But you get requited with success. And you got to stop and remember what a blessing this is. Working with others is the greatest gift you will ever have. And as I say, you don't have to be their sponsor. What you have to do is go to meetings and find someone weak and heavy laden and be kind. That's the greatest form of AA working, to call someone that you know needs a call, that maybe even don't want to hear from you very much, but you call them and eventually they do want to hear from you. To extend a hand of, that's what AA is about. It isn't going, we always talk about AA being helping the new people. Sometimes the old people need help too. Sometimes everybody here gets weak and heavy laden sometimes, and sometimes it's just too much to bear. And then you work with other alcoholics. You give them an arm around the back. Dr. Bob, when he was dying in 1950 at the First International Convention, he had to help him to the podium. And he tried to communicate everything he learned in 15 years in 15 sentences, because he couldn't talk very long because of his cancer. And he chose 3 topics which are of great interest for us. And one of the topics he chose, of course, he said, we must never forget to take the time to help those behind us, because none of us would be here if someone had done it for us. And that certainly is true. And it goes against the grain, as Clint was saying. It goes against the grain. My God, I can barely take care of myself. I can't even take care of myself. How can I worry about you? But in worrying about you, I take care of me. And that's the concept of conventions and getting together and meetings. That's what meetings were first started. They weren't started to teach people. They were started to show newcomers there were sober alcoholics. That's what they were there for. And little by little, they became an object in themselves. But this convention, the best thing, this convention has been here a long time. I was looking at the program last night. I've known every one of the chairmen, from the first chairman to now. And I've known them all, and many of them I've been close friends with. Many of them are dead. And this is a great convention. This is the Southern California Convention. We have other conventions. We have a good convention in San Fernando Valley and Orange County and in San Diego and a lot of places. Here in Bakersfield, Santa Barbara, Ventura, all kinds of conventions. But they are just local conventions. This is the convention of the Southern California area where we come from all over. If you want to help others, next year in San Diego, you come and you bring somebody else with you. Because this year, apparently it wasn't as well publicized as it might have been. A lot of people didn't even know about it. I go out and speak at meetings, and they hadn't heard a word about it. So you and I, the best thing we can do to help others is have a place like this to come so they can hear great speakers like we've heard, like we will hear later this morning. We will see people in action. We'll people stand at this podium in a marathon. We'll see people talk about the central office and talk about the general service office. And a young people speak, like that wonderful speaker yesterday afternoon, and old funny Hank last night, all kinds of things, just on and on. And they will leave here better people than you. And maybe they'll leave here with enough knowledge to work with others, as you've worked with others in doing it. So I'm very happy to be, on behalf of the Marathon Committee and Emmett and everyone, I want to thank you very much for helping me participate in my sobriety. I'm glad that you are here. I hope that we will always remember the lessons we have so painfully learned to stay here. And after a moment's meditation, I'd like to ask Harvey A. to lead us in the Lord's Prayer. That's all right. I just assume that you're too overcome with emotion to clap.